The day was calm, the sky covered with soft clouds, and the air had that quiet stillness that comes after rain. Big Shaq was driving down a highway that stretched through small towns and empty fields. He was not rushing anywhere. Life had given him enough reasons to move fast, but he had also learned that sometimes slowing down showed you things that speed would make you miss. On this day, slowing down would change not only his life, but also the life of someone he had never met before. As he pulled into a small gas station, the kind of place where the paint on the signs was peeling and the air smelled of oil and dust, he noticed something that made him pause. Near the black car at the first pump, a young woman stood in a faded blue dress. She was not just filling her own tank. She was clearly working at the station. One hand held the heavy gas nozzle, while the other rested gently on her stomach. That simple gesture told him she was expecting. She was pregnant, and the way she leaned slightly forward showed that her body was already tired. Shaq turned off his engine but did not step out right away. Instead, he sat for a moment, watching with quiet thoughtfulness. He saw how she pressed her lips together, as if trying to hide discomfort. The summer heat pressed down on her, and a few strands of hair had slipped loose from the bun at the back of her head. She did not complain, did not sigh loudly, did not look around for sympathy. She just did her job, moving slowly but with determination, as if she had promised herself she would finish every task no matter how heavy it felt. Something about her posture reminded Shaq of his mother. He remembered how she had worked long hours just to keep food on the table. He remembered her hands always tired but never stopping. He remembered how she never spoke much about her pain, but showed strength in every step she took. Watching this young woman in the blue dress, Shaq felt the same quiet resilience that he had grown up seeing. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was powerful. He finally stepped out of his car. His tall frame and strong presence made people often look twice when he entered a space, and this was no different. The woman glanced up for a second, surprised to see someone like him at such a small roadside station, but then her eyes dropped again and she went back to her task. Shaq walked toward her, not too close at first. He wanted to understand before he spoke. He looked at the old pumps, the worn-out floor of the station, and then back at her. Every detail told him the same story. This was not a place where anyone made good money, yet here she was, working while carrying another life inside her. He cleared his throat lightly and asked, "Are you all right?" His voice was deep but calm, the kind of tone that carried concern without pressing too hard. The woman looked up again, this time holding his gaze for a few seconds. There was tiredness in her eyes, but also strength. She nodded quickly and said, "Yes, I am fine. Just a bit tired." Her hand instinctively pressed against her belly again, as if to reassure herself more than anyone else. Shaq did not want to intrude, but something inside told him he should not just walk away. He introduced himself simply, "I am Shaq, I was just passing by." The woman gave a small smile, polite but cautious. "Maria," she said softly before turning back to the pump. Shaq noticed the way she shifted her weight from one foot to another. He noticed how carefully she breathed, as if even standing for too long was becoming a challenge. He wanted to ask more questions, but also respected her space, so he stood there quietly, letting the silence fill the air between them. Minutes passed like that. Maria finished filling the car and carefully placed the nozzle back. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and glanced toward the small office of the station. It was clear she had more work waiting inside. Shaq followed her gaze and saw no other workers. She was alone, handling the entire place. The thought struck him deeply. A pregnant woman alone at a gas station, working under the weight of exhaustion with no one to help. It was not just unusual, it was heartbreaking. Finally, he asked, "How far along are you?" His tone was soft, almost hesitant because he did not want her to feel uncomfortable. Maria hesitated, then answered quietly, 7 months. Shaq's chest tightened a little at her words. 7 months meant she was close, and yet here she was, still pushing herself as if the world had given her no other choice. He nodded slowly, letting her know he respected her honesty. In that moment, he remembered the many times people had stepped in to help him when he was younger. Coaches, teachers, neighbors, people who had no obligation to care but did so anyway. Their kindness had shaped his path, and he knew he would not be where he was without it. Looking at Maria, he realized it was his turn to pass that kindness forward. Shaq took a step closer, his eyes steady but filled with warmth. He said the words that would soon change Maria's life forever. "I have an offer for you." Maria froze, her hand still resting on her belly. She looked up at him with wide eyes, not sure what he meant. In her world, offers usually came with strings attached, with demands she could not afford to meet. But something about his voice, steady and sincere, made her listen. Shaq did not explain everything right away. He wanted her to know that his words came from genuine care, not pity or charity. He wanted her to feel safe, to understand that he saw her not just as a worker or a stranger, but as a human being carrying the most important role in the world: motherhood. As the cars passed by on the highway and the sound of the gas pump clicked off behind them, that one sentence hung in the air like a bridge between two lives. "I have an offer for you." Maria's heart beat faster. She had no idea what was coming, but for the first time in months she felt like someone truly saw her, and that was only the beginning. Maria stood frozen for a few seconds after hearing those words. No one had ever spoken to her like that at the gas station. Not the drivers rushing through, not the people who sometimes frowned when she moved slower than usual. "I have an offer for you." The words repeated in her mind, and she felt unsure if she had heard them right. Shaq looked at her with calm eyes, not forcing her to answer, just giving her space. She pressed her palm lightly against her belly and shifted her weight. It was not the first time someone noticed she was pregnant, but it was the first time someone seemed to notice her as a person, and not just her condition. She thought of the past months, how every day had been the same endless routine. She woke up before sunrise, ate a small breakfast if she had anything in the cupboard, and walked half a mile to the gas station. The pay was small, barely enough to cover rent for her tiny apartment and a little food. She had learned to stretch every coin until it bent, buying rice and beans in bulk, skipping meals when needed, and telling herself that once the baby came, things would get better somehow. Yet deep down she knew life was not waiting to become easier. Life was demanding her strength right now. Her boss at the gas station was not cruel, but he was practical. He had told her she could keep working as long as she did her tasks. There were no breaks beyond the short minutes she could steal between customers. There was no chair behind the counter, because the job was meant for someone who could stay on their feet. She had wanted to stop working earlier, maybe at 6 months, but she could not afford it. With no husband by her side and no parents to support her, she only had herself. She often whispered to the child inside her, promising, "I will make sure you have everything I never had." That promise kept her going even when her back ached so much she could barely sleep at night. Shaq could see pieces of that story written across her face. The way her shoulders bent slightly forward, the way her lips stayed pressed tightly together as if holding back words of exhaustion. He did not need to know all the details yet. He could already tell she carried more than one burden. He remembered how he used to see his mother come home after long days, hiding her tiredness so her children would not worry. He knew what silent strength looked like, and Maria had it. He spoke again, his voice steady but gentle. "You should not be out here doing this by yourself." Maria lowered her eyes. She wanted to tell him that she had no choice, that life did not stop just because she was expecting, but she stayed silent. Sometimes silence felt safer than explaining everything. People often judged, and she had grown used to swallowing her pain quietly. Shaq leaned against the pump stand, giving her a little more space but staying close enough to show he was not leaving. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Almost a year." Her voice was soft but carried a trace of pride. This job may not have been glamorous, but it had kept her going. Shaq nodded as if to say he respected her effort. He did not pity her, and that mattered. He looked around at the worn-down station and then back at her. "And you are here every day?" 6 days a week, Maria replied. "Sometimes 7 if the other worker does not show up." She looked away quickly, almost embarrassed, as though she feared admitting how much she worked would make her sound desperate. But Shaq did not see desperation. He saw courage. He saw someone who refused to stop even when life kept stacking obstacles in her way. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it was not heavy. Maria felt something different in it, something almost comforting. She glanced at Shaq and noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her belly. He was not staring out of curiosity. He was looking with respect, as if he understood the sacred weight she carried. Finally, she whispered, "I cannot stop working. I have to take care of the baby. Shaq heard those words and they landed deeply in his heart. He understood them more than she realized. He remembered the nights when his mother worked herself sick, just so he and his siblings could eat. He remembered telling himself as a young boy that one day he would be in a position to make sure others did not have to fight so hard alone. Standing there with Maria, he knew this was one of those moments. He straightened up, his tall frame towering over the quiet station. His voice carried steady assurance. You should not be worrying about how to survive right now. You should be thinking about resting, eating well, and being ready for that baby. Maria blinked, her eyes watering slightly, though she tried to hide it. No one had said that to her. Everyone else told her to be strong, to keep working, to endure. No one told her it was okay to stop. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of exhaustion loosen, just a little under the kindness of a stranger's words. She asked cautiously, "What do you mean by offer?" Shaq smiled gently, not the smile of someone trying to impress, but of someone trying to comfort. "I mean, you do not have to carry all of this alone. I can help you. I can make sure you do not have to stand out here every day until the baby comes." Maria shook her head slightly, confusion and disbelief washing over her. She had lived too long with disappointment to trust easily. Offers often came with hidden costs, and she could not afford mistakes. She looked at him carefully, searching for signs of dishonesty, but found none. His eyes were steady, his tone sincere. Still, she whispered, "Why?" "You do not even know me." Shaq paused. He thought of all the times people had helped him for no reason other than kindness. He thought of the strangers who had stepped into his life when he needed guidance, of the neighbors who gave food when his family had none. He thought of the teachers who believed in him when he doubted himself. He could not explain it in fancy words, so he said simply, "Because I see how hard you are fighting. And because I can." Maria pressed her lips together, trying to hold back tears. She wanted to believe him, but part of her heart had grown used to disappointment. Yet another part, the part that dreamed of a safer future for her child, wanted to trust. The hum of the highway filled the silence, and the smell of gasoline lingered in the air. Shaq's words hung between them, a lifeline stretched out in a world that often looked the other way. Maria's hand rested on her stomach again, and she felt her baby kick lightly, almost as if reminding her that she was not just deciding for herself but for another life too. Shaq did not push her to answer quickly. He just stood quietly, his large frame steady, his presence calm. He knew that real trust took time, and he was willing to wait. That moment at the gas station was not just an encounter. It was the beginning of a story that neither of them had expected. A story built on kindness, strength, and the belief that even strangers could change each other's lives forever. Maria stood with her hand still resting on her belly, the hum of cars from the distant highway filling the silence between them. She had heard promises before, promises from people who claimed they wanted to help but disappeared as soon as she depended on them. Yet something about this man, standing calm and steady in front of her, felt different. His voice had not been rushed or forced. It carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from experience and sincerity. Still, her heart wrestled with doubt. Why would a stranger care about her struggle when so many people she once trusted had turned away? Shaq did not try to speak again right away. He gave her the gift of silence, waiting for her to breathe, waiting for her to gather courage. Then he asked a question so ordinary yet filled with deep meaning. "How far along are you?" Maria blinked, caught off guard by how gentle the question sounded. She was used to people noticing her stomach, sometimes making careless comments about her size or asking when she was due with tones that felt more like judgment than kindness. But his words were different. They did not carry gossip, they carried genuine care. She took a slow breath and answered, 7 months. She expected him to nod politely and move on, but instead she saw his eyes soften. There was no pity in them, only respect. It was as if he was silently acknowledging the journey she had been carrying, not just for 7 months, but for years before that. All the struggles that led her to this moment. Shaq leaned slightly forward, his voice calm. 7 months is a long road already. You must be tired. The word struck Maria unexpectedly. Tired. She had been tired for months, but no one ever asked her about it. People saw her pumping gas, cleaning windows, or carrying heavy boxes of supplies and thought she was fine because she never complained. Even her boss, who sometimes noticed her moving slower, never asked if she was tired. He only reminded her to be quick, Because customers would not wait. Now, hearing someone acknowledge her exhaustion, Maria felt her throat tighten. She nodded slowly, unable to deny the truth. Shaq did not push her to say more. He simply stood there, his tall frame like a shelter in the harsh afternoon light. He could see she was not used to sharing her struggles openly. He knew what that felt like, growing up in a world where showing weakness could be dangerous, where strength was the only language people respected. He wanted to tell her it was all right to lean on others, but he understood that trust was not built in minutes. It was built in small, patient steps. Maria glanced back at the small station office, worried that someone might see her standing there talking instead of working. But when she looked around, she realized she was still alone. No one was watching. For a moment it felt as though the world had paused, giving her space she rarely had. She looked back at Shaq and asked quietly, almost in a whisper, "Why do you care?" It was not a question filled with rudeness. It was a question born from disbelief. Why would a stranger care when people close to her had not? Shaq's face softened with a memory. He remembered the days when he was younger, sitting in a small apartment with nothing in the fridge, wondering how his family would make it through the week. He remembered neighbors who brought food without asking questions, coaches who drove him home after practice so he would not have to walk in the cold, teachers who told him he was worth more than the world tried to convince him. Their kindness had shaped his future, and now standing in front of Maria, he knew it was his turn to carry that same kindness forward. He answered her in the simplest words, the only ones that mattered. "Because I see you, and because I can." Maria felt her chest rise sharply, as if those words had knocked the air out of her. People passed her every day, but they never really saw her. They saw a worker, a cashier, a tired woman in a faded dress, but not her. She swallowed hard, her eyes shining, though she tried to hold back tears. She wanted to believe him, but the walls she had built around her heart were strong. Shaq noticed the hesitation in her silence. He did not rush to convince her with grand promises. Instead, he asked another simple question, one that showed his sincerity. "Do you have someone helping you through this?" Maria's lips trembled before she finally shook her head. "No, it is just me." Her voice was small, as if saying the words out loud made the loneliness heavier. She looked down embarrassed, as though admitting the truth was something to be ashamed of. Shaq's chest tightened. He had seen many strong people in his life, but strength like this, quiet, uncelebrated, and alone, was rare. He could not imagine his mother surviving without the small community that had supported her. And yet here was Maria, carrying life inside her with nothing but her own willpower to keep her moving. He took a slow breath, then spoke carefully. "It should not be just you. No one should have to go through this alone." His voice carried conviction, not as a lecture but as a promise. Maria stared at him, confused by his certainty. Offers from strangers usually came with hidden costs, but his words sounded more like truth than negotiation. She felt her baby kick lightly at that moment, and she placed her hand against her belly with a protective smile. The baby's movement reminded her that every decision she made was not just for herself, but for the small life growing inside. Could she allow herself to trust? Could she allow this man's kindness to enter the fragile world she had built around survival? Shaq looked around the station one more time. The pumps were old, the ground stained from years of spilled fuel, and the small office looked lonely. He thought of how Maria must stand there every day, fighting her tired body while serving strangers who never asked her name. He could not let her stay in that picture. Finally, he said with quiet strength, "Maria, I want to help you. Not for today, not just for a moment, but until your baby comes. You should not be standing out here working yourself sick. You deserve to rest, to eat well, to feel safe. That is my offer." Maria's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had offered her something so human, so necessary, without expecting something in return. She opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Her heart pounded fast, caught between fear and hope. She wanted to ask why again, but she already knew the answer. He cared because he chose to care. He could because he had the ability. That was all. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. The hum of the highway, the chirp of birds nearby, even the faint buzz of the pump all seemed distant compared to the weight of his words. Maria pressed her hand more firmly against her stomach, as if seeking guidance from the child within. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering in her heart, "Maybe this is the answer I have been waiting for." When she opened her eyes, Shaq was still standing there, steady and patient. He had not moved away. He was not in a rush. That patience told her more than any words could. She took a slow breath and nodded just slightly. A gesture so small yet filled with the courage of a woman willing to take the first step toward trust. Shaq's lips curved into a gentle smile, not of triumph, but of relief. He knew this was the beginning of something important. He knew lives were about to change. And as the sun shifted lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn concrete of the gas station, Maria realized that for the first time in a very long time, she was not alone. Maria could not stop thinking about the words she had just heard. She stood there under the fading light of the sun, one hand resting on her belly and the other brushing a strand of hair from her tired face. This stranger, this tall man with kind eyes, had just offered her something she had not felt in months. Hope. Hope that maybe she would not have to keep carrying the weight of her struggles alone. Hope that maybe she could rest and prepare for her child, without feeling guilty for not working herself to the bone. Yet that hope frightened her just as much as it comforted her, because hope meant trusting someone again, and trusting meant opening herself to the risk of disappointment. Maria had spent too long surviving disappointment after disappointment. She had been left by people she thought would never leave. She had been told promises by those who broke them without a second thought. She had taught herself that the only person she could count on was herself. And now here was this man offering to carry some of the load. She did not know whether to believe him or to protect herself from the pain of believing. Shaq could see the hesitation in her eyes. He did not judge it, because he knew what it was like to be let down. He remembered the times when he had to figure out whether to trust the people who claimed they were there to help him. Some had stayed, some had left, but he remembered how much it had meant every time someone followed through on their word. He wanted Maria to feel that same security. So he stood calm, letting her breathe, giving her the chance to see that he was not rushing or forcing her into a decision. "Maria," he said softly, "you have been fighting so hard, but no one should have to fight alone all the time. Let me help you." Maria's lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but could not find the right words. Finally, she whispered, "I cannot accept charity. I do not want anyone to think I am weak." Her voice carried the pride of someone who had learned to stand even when her legs shook, someone who had taught herself never to beg even when hunger pressed hard against her ribs. She wanted her child to grow up seeing her as strong, not as someone who relied on strangers. Shaq shook his head gently, his deep voice calm but firm. "This is not charity. This is support. Everyone needs someone at some point. My mother needed help and people stepped in. I would not be standing here today if it were not for them. If they had looked away, maybe my life would have been different. What I am offering you is not pity, it is respect. Respect for the fight you have been carrying alone for too long." Maria's eyes watered. No one had ever spoken to her like that. People usually saw her as a worker, a cashier, a nameless person behind a counter. They did not see her dignity, her effort, or the courage it took to keep showing up day after day. To hear someone not only recognize her fight but respect it made her feel both fragile and strong at the same time. Still, she asked, "What exactly are you offering?" Her voice was careful, steadying itself. Shaq nodded, understanding that she needed clarity, not vague promises. "I am offering to make sure you do not have to work here until your baby comes. I will cover your bills. I will help you find a safe place to stay, with food and care so you can rest. You will have doctor visits, you will have what you need, and you will not be standing here in the heat and cold pumping gas. You can focus on your health and your child. That is my offer." Maria's body went still. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. She looked at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what she had just heard. To her, this sounded impossible, like something out of a story. People did not simply step in and change the course of another person's life. Not without asking for something in return. And yet here he was, saying it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her lips parted as if to argue, to say it was too much. But the words caught in her throat. Deep down, she longed for exactly what he described. A chance to stop, to rest, to prepare for her child without fear. But fear of disappointment made her hesitate. "Why would you do all of that for me?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. Shaq looked directly into her eyes, his voice low but steady. "Because I know what it is like to grow up with nothing. Because I know what it is like to watch someone you love sacrifice everything, just to make it to the next day. And because I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone carrying that same weight, I would. And now I have that chance. Maria felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed to show emotion in front of him. But Shaq did not look away. He did not make her feel weak for crying. Instead, he let the moment sit heavy and real. She whispered, "It sounds too good to be true." "I know," Shaq replied gently. "But sometimes good things are true. Sometimes the help we pray for shows up when we least expect it." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her baby move gently inside her belly. She thought of all the nights she had whispered prayers into the darkness, asking for strength, asking for a way forward, asking that her child would not be born into a world where survival was their only goal. Was this the answer she had been waiting for? She did not know, but her heart told her that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to believe. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Shaq with a mixture of fear and hope. "And you will not expect anything from me?" she asked cautiously. Shaq shook his head. "The only thing I expect is that you take care of yourself and your baby. That is all. That is the most important job in the world." Maria let out a shaky breath, a small laugh escaping her lips despite the tears. "I do not even know what to say." "Say yes," Shaq replied with a smile. "Say yes to resting, to eating well, to being safe. Say yes to giving your child the start they deserve." The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to leap but afraid of falling. Maria had lived too long building walls to protect herself. But now, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched across the cracked pavement of the station, she felt her heart whisper that it was time to trust. Her voice was soft, trembling but filled with courage when she finally said, "Yes." Shaq's smile grew wider, not one of pride but of deep relief. He reached out his large hand not to shake hers like a deal, but simply as a gesture of support. Maria hesitated, then placed her smaller hand in his, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was not standing alone. At that moment, the old gas station faded into the background, and what stood clear was the beginning of a new chapter. An unbelievable offer had just turned into a lifeline, and Maria's world, once defined by exhaustion and survival, was about to change forever. Maria could hardly sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress in her small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling while her baby moved gently inside her. Her mind replayed every word Shaq had spoken at the station. She had agreed, but even as she whispered that yes, part of her still wondered if it had been real. Would he come back? Would his promise hold? Or would this be another memory of hope slipping through her fingers? She had learned not to expect much from people, yet her heart kept clinging to the warmth in his eyes, the steady calm in his voice, the way he made her feel seen. She pressed her hand against her stomach and whispered, "Maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time someone will stay." The next morning, as she walked back to the gas station to start her shift, she half expected to find everything the same, as if yesterday had only been a dream. But before she could even step behind the counter, a familiar voice called her name. She turned, and there he was, Shaq, standing tall, dressed casually but carrying the same presence that had unsettled and comforted her the day before. Relief washed over her. He had come back. This was not just talk. "Good morning, Maria," he said, his deep voice kind. "Are you ready to start making some changes?" Her lips curved into the smallest smile. She nodded, though her nerves still fluttered. "I think so." Shaq did not waste time. He explained that he had already made some calls, arranged an appointment with a doctor, and spoken to someone who had a small apartment available near a quiet neighborhood. He wanted her to see it, to make sure it felt right for her. Maria's eyes widened. She had never seen anyone move so quickly for her sake. Most of her life, when she needed help, she had to beg and wait, and often the answer was still no. Now a man she had only just met was opening doors she thought would remain closed forever. She tried to protest at first. "You have already done so much. I do not want to be a burden." Shaq shook his head firmly. "You are not a burden. Taking care of yourself and your baby is the most important thing right now. Let me handle the rest." The firmness in his tone quieted her doubts. He was not helping out of pity. He was helping out of conviction. That difference mattered. Later that day, Maria found herself standing inside a small but cozy apartment. The walls were freshly painted, the windows let in warm light, and the air carried the scent of new beginnings. There was a simple couch, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, and a small bedroom that felt like heaven compared to the thin mattress she had been sleeping on. She walked slowly through the rooms, running her hand along the walls, unable to believe this could be hers, even temporarily. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to Shaq. "I do not know how to thank you." Shaq smiled gently. "You do not need to thank me. Just promise me you will rest, eat, and take care of yourself. That is all I want." For the first time in months, Maria felt safe. That night, lying on a real bed with clean sheets, she placed her hand over her stomach and whispered to her unborn child, "We are going to be okay. Someone is looking out for us." The baby kicked lightly, and Maria closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe. The weeks that followed felt like a transformation she could hardly recognize as her own life. Shaq made sure she had groceries in her kitchen: fresh fruits, vegetables, bread, milk. He arranged for her doctor visits and even accompanied her to some of them, sitting quietly in the waiting room, reassuring her with his presence. He checked in often, not as someone hovering but as someone who genuinely cared. He treated her with dignity, never making her feel small, never making her feel like she owed him something. Maria's body began to relax in ways it had not for months. Her back still ached, her feet still swelled, but now she had time to rest. She no longer stood for hours in the sun pumping gas. She no longer skipped meals to stretch her money. For the first time, she felt like she was preparing to welcome her child into the world, not just dragging herself to the finish line. She noticed the changes not just in herself but in the way people around her looked at her. The neighbors in the new building saw her smile more, saw her walking slowly with a glow that had been missing before. The doctor told her that her health had improved, that her baby was strong and growing well. Every good report felt like a gift, proof that the transformation was real. One evening, Maria sat at the small kitchen table with a plate of food Shaq had dropped off earlier. She thought about how different her life had been only weeks ago: lonely, exhausting, and heavy with fear. She thought about the nights she had cried quietly, wondering if her baby would be born into struggle. Now she was sitting in a safe home with food in her belly and hope in her heart. The change was so great she could hardly believe it. But it was not just the physical transformation that mattered. It was the emotional one. For so long, Maria had felt invisible, unnoticed by the world. She had felt like her strength went unseen, her sacrifices ignored. But Shaq had seen her. He had not just seen her as a tired worker at a gas station. He had seen her as a woman, a mother, a human being carrying dignity and worth. That recognition had transformed her spirit as much as his help had transformed her circumstances. One afternoon, as Shaq dropped by to check on her, Maria looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Out of all the people you could help, why did you stop for me?" Shaq thought for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be overlooked. And I know how much one person's kindness can change a life. You were standing there working hard, carrying more than you should have to. I could not just drive away." Maria nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She realized then that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin in the simplest moments, when one person chooses to stop, to notice, to care. As the days turned into weeks, Maria grew stronger, more hopeful. She decorated the small bedroom for her baby with a few simple items: blankets, a crib, tiny clothes. Each item filled her heart with anticipation instead of fear. She began to dream again, not of survival but of possibilities. And through it all, Shaq remained steady, not as a savior but as a supporter, reminding her that she was capable, that she was worthy, that she was not alone. Maria knew her journey was far from over. The hardest days of motherhood were still ahead, but for the first time she felt ready. For the first time, she felt like she was walking into the future with hope rather than dread. Her transformation was not just about moving from a gas station to an apartment. It was about moving from despair to dignity, from exhaustion to strength, from being unseen to being valued. And it all began with one encounter, one simple offer, one choice by a stranger to say, "I will help." The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines and the occasional muffled footsteps of nurses in the hallway. Maria lay in the bed, her hands gripping the blanket, her face pale but strong. 7 months had turned into 9, and now the moment she had been waiting for was finally here. The contractions had begun early that morning, sharp and relentless, and by afternoon she had been admitted. Fear and excitement mingled in her heart like two rivers colliding. She was about to meet the child who had been her reason to fight through so many long, lonely nights. Shaq sat in the waiting area, his large frame hunched slightly forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His hands were clasped tightly, and though he was a man known for his calm presence, there was a nervous energy in him now. He had watched Maria's journey, had seen her transformation from a weary worker at a gas station to a glowing mother preparing for new life. He had promised her she would not walk this path alone, and now, at the most important moment, he felt the weight of that promise in every beat of his heart. He was not family by blood, but in that moment, he felt as though he were. Time moved slowly in hospitals, the minutes stretching into hours. Shaq rose every few minutes, pacing the hallway, glancing toward the delivery room doors, then sitting back down. He thought of his own mother, of the sacrifices she had made, of the strength it must have taken to bring him into the world. He thought of how she had raised him through struggles most people never saw. He felt a deep respect for Maria, knowing that her strength was of the same kind. Inside the delivery room, Maria pushed through wave after wave of pain. Sweat dampened her forehead, her breathing labored. The nurses encouraged her, their voices steady and calm, reminding her she was close. Each contraction felt like a mountain, but Maria dug deep, drawing on every ounce of strength she had gathered from months of sacrifice, from nights of loneliness, from days of relentless work. This was the moment all her resilience had been preparing her for. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, a cry filled the room. It was sharp, pure, and filled with life. Maria's eyes blurred with tears as the nurse placed a small, wriggling baby in her arms. She looked down at her son, his tiny hands curling, his face scrunched as he wailed. Her heart swelled with love so fierce it pushed away every ounce of pain she had felt. She whispered softly, her voice trembling, "We made it, little one." "We made it." Shaq heard the cry from the hallway. He froze, his eyes widening, and then a slow, powerful smile spread across his face. Relief and joy rushed through him like a wave. He stood, his tall frame almost too big for the narrow corridor, and waited anxiously until the doctor stepped out. "She did great," the doctor said with a reassuring nod. "Mother and baby are healthy." Those words lifted a weight from Shaq's chest. He whispered a quiet thank you, not just to the doctor but to the universe for guiding him to that gas station weeks ago. When he was finally allowed into the room, Shaq stepped inside quietly, his usual confident presence softened by reverence. Maria looked exhausted, her hair damp, her face pale, but her eyes glowed with pride and tenderness as she cradled her son. She looked up at Shaq, tears glistening, and whispered, "Meet him." Shaq moved closer, his large hands almost hesitant as Maria carefully placed the baby in his arms. The child was so small, so fragile, yet when Shaq looked down at him, he felt the weight of something greater than size. He felt the weight of life, of responsibility, of love. The baby's tiny fingers stretched and curled around nothing, and Shaq's eyes softened as he whispered, "You are going to have a good start. Your mother made sure of that." Maria watched him with tears streaming down her cheeks. She had imagined this moment countless times during her hardest days, giving birth alone, with no one to share it with, no one to celebrate her strength. But now, instead of loneliness, there was presence. Instead of silence, there was shared joy. For the first time in so long, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen, valued, supported. The nurses moved quietly around them, checking monitors, adjusting blankets. But for Maria and Shaq, the world had narrowed to the small bundle in his arms. It was a holy moment, not in a church, not under stained glass windows, but in the simple, sacred space of new life. Shaq gently handed the baby back to Maria, his voice steady. "He is strong, just like his mother." Maria smiled through her tears, pressing her lips to her son's forehead. "I want him to grow up knowing that kindness still exists in the world," she whispered. "He will," Shaq replied, "because he will grow up seeing it in you." The hours passed quietly after that. Maria fed her baby, held him close, and whispered promises into his tiny ears. Shaq stayed nearby, stepping out when needed but always returning, making sure she knew she was not alone. Every time Maria looked at him, she saw not just a man but a reminder that goodness could arrive when least expected. When night fell and the room grew quiet, Maria closed her eyes with her baby on her chest. She drifted into sleep, her body finally resting after months of struggle. Shaq sat in the chair beside her bed, his arms crossed loosely, watching over them. He thought about how chance encounters sometimes carried the power to rewrite destinies. He thought about how one decision, to stop, to notice, to care, could ripple outward into a future brighter than anyone imagined. And as he sat there in the dim hospital light, Shaq realized that this moment, this small child, this tired but radiant mother had also changed him. Helping Maria had reminded him of what truly mattered. It was not wealth, fame, or recognition. It was this: being there when someone needed you, offering hope when they had none, giving without expecting anything in return. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper before settling again, and Shaq leaned back in the chair, a quiet peace settling over him. The day of birth had not only brought new life into the world, it had breathed new meaning into his own. Weeks had passed since that unforgettable day in the hospital, and the world around Maria felt entirely different. The baby, now a few weeks old, slept peacefully in her arms as she sat on a park bench one sunny afternoon. The air smelled of fresh grass and blooming flowers, and children's laughter echoed nearby. For the first time in years, Maria felt her shoulders lighten. The burden she had carried for so long was no longer crushing her chest. She could finally breathe. She could finally smile without forcing it. And all of this, she knew, had begun with one act of kindness. One stranger who chose to stop instead of walking past. Shaq stood a few feet away, laughing with a group of neighborhood kids who had gathered around him. His tall frame, once intimidating to Maria, now seemed warm and familiar. The children looked up at him with wide eyes as though he were a giant out of a storybook. He listened to them, played small games, and treated each one as if they mattered. Maria watched him closely, and her heart filled with a deep sense of gratitude. He had not just changed her circumstances, he had changed her spirit. She thought back to the gas station, the smell of fuel, the cracked pavement under her feet, the way the sun had beaten down on her tired body. She remembered how she had stood there believing her life would always be that way. Endless shifts, endless exhaustion, endless loneliness. And then Shaq had walked in, not with judgment, not with pity, but with the simple decision to care. That moment had changed everything. Maria pressed her lips to her baby's head and whispered softly, "You are going to grow up in a world where kindness is real. I will make sure you see it not just through him but through me too." The baby stirred but stayed calm, and Maria smiled. She had promised herself long ago that her child would have more than she did. She thought that meant working herself to the bone, never stopping, never resting. But now she understood something new. Giving her child more was not just about money or survival. It was about love, about creating an environment where compassion and dignity could thrive. Later, as Shaq walked over and sat beside her on the bench, Maria looked at him with quiet eyes full of meaning. "You know you saved me, right?" she said softly. Shaq shook his head gently. "I didn't save you. You were already strong. I just made sure you had space to show that strength without breaking." Maria swallowed the lump in her throat. "You gave me back my faith. For so long I thought I had to do everything alone. I thought the world did not care. But you proved me wrong." Shaq leaned back on the bench, looking out at the children playing in the grass. "The world does care, Maria. Sometimes you just have to meet the right people at the right time. And sometimes, when you least expect it, someone shows up. That is how it worked for me. And now it is my turn to show up for others." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Maria realized that what had happened was bigger than her story alone. It was about a cycle of kindness, a chain that had started long before her and would continue long after. Shaq had been helped once, and now he had helped her. One day, when she was strong enough, she would help someone else. That was how lives were changed. Not through one grand act, but through kindness passed from one person to the next. In the months that followed, Maria settled into her new life with steady steps. The apartment became a home, filled with the laughter of her baby and the quiet comfort of safety. Shaq remained close, not as someone hovering over her, but as someone she could trust. He became like family. Not replacing the ones she had lost, but filling a gap she thought would remain empty forever. Whenever she walked past the gas station now, she felt a strange mix of emotions. It had once been a place of exhaustion and despair, but now it was the place where her new life began. She did not hate it. Instead, she saw it as the turning point, the proof that even the hardest places could hold hidden blessings. As her baby grew, Maria noticed small changes in herself too. She laughed more freely, she walked with more confidence, and she spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had survived darkness and stepped into light. She no longer carried shame for needing help, because she understood now that accepting kindness did not make her weak. It made her human, and being human meant leaning on each other. One evening, months later, Maria found herself rocking her baby to sleep, while looking out the window at the lights of the city. She thought about the future, the schools, the birthdays, the milestones that lay ahead. She thought about how far she had come, from the lonely worker at the gas station to the mother sitting in a safe home. Her child cradled against her chest. She whispered softly into the quiet room, "We are going to be all right. Better than all right." And she knew it was true because she had learned that real strength did not come from doing everything alone. It came from letting others walk with you, from believing in the power of kindness, from trusting that the world could still surprise you with goodness. Shaq never asked for recognition. He never told anyone about what he had done. For him, it was not about the story being told, it was about the life being lived. But Maria knew. She knew her life had been changed forever. And she knew her child would grow up carrying the story of a man who chose to stop, chose to notice, and chose to help. Years later, when her son was old enough to understand, she would tell him the story. She would tell him how she was tired and alone, how she had almost given up hope, and how one day at a small gas station, everything changed. She would tell him that kindness can be powerful, that strength can be shared, and that sometimes angels do not come with wings. They come with big hands and even bigger hearts. And her son would grow up knowing that his life began, not just with his mother's strength, but with the kindness of a stranger who became family. He would grow up with a legacy of compassion, a legacy that Maria knew he would one day carry forward in his own way. The story of Maria and Shaq was not written in history books or shouted across news headlines. It was written in quiet acts of care, in shared laughter, in the simple truth that lives can change when people choose kindness. And though the world might never know the full depth of it, Maria knew, and that was enough. As the seasons turned and the years moved forward, one truth remained clear: kindness leaves a legacy greater than any fame or fortune. It builds bridges, heals wounds, and lights the path for generations yet to come. Maria and her son would carry that truth always, because one day a man named Shaq spotted a woman at a gas station, and what he did next amazed not only her, but everyone who would ever hear the story.